Okay, calm down. You got rivers, man. You got rivers, man. Okay, calm down.
Hello and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. I am so excited to be here tonight, and I'm so excited to be joined by all of you. And it is a dark world out there, but hopefully here we provide some voices of light, which is what I think tonight's guest will be. And I'm so grateful to the guests for coming on. But before I bring on the guests, I just want to remind everyone to please like the stream. That is a way that you can just support the show for free. Just hit it a like, just give it a thumbs up. Only do that once, because if you do it twice, then it undoes it. So give us one thumbs up. Also, if you haven't already subscribed, please do subscribe to the show. And to do that, you just hit subscribe and then hit the bell. Also, if you can become Patreon supporters, that's so great. It literally helps the show happen in a very real way. Like, we just literally couldn't do the show without your support. And you can do that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And if you do $1 a month, you are making the show happen. If you do $5 a month, you get all sorts of great extended interviews and bonus content. And of course, we really encourage people to like this, which is a free way to support the show, and share this content, because as people know, there's a lot of suppression of shows that talk about Palestine. So that's how you can do your part. And during the second half of the show, we're going to be talking about the election of Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico. But the first half of the show, we are dedicating, as we do so often, because it's such a unfairly covered topic. We're going to be talking about Palestine. And of course, there's such a huge media bias against Palestine. So that's why we cover it so much on the show. Oh, thank you. Firmware says, great job on TRT World yesterday. Yes, TRT World released an interview with me, which was cool. So I'm going to introduce our first two guests, and one of them is a return guest. You guys love her, Dr. Assal. She is a scholar of Middle East history. She works on research and writing related to U.S. foreign policy issues, the Middle East, and contemporary Iran. And her writing can be seen in Newsweek, The Independent. She's been a commentator on BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN, NPR. She completed a PhD in history from the University of California, Irvine, and is the author of the book, The State of Resistance, Politics, Culture, and Identity in Modern Iran. So welcome, Assal, back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Of course. And also so excited to be bringing on, making his Katie Halper Show debut, Dr. Thayer Ahmad, who is a board-certified emergency medicine physician and a board member for MedGlobal, a medical humanitarian NGO that works at building healthcare capacity and reducing health inequalities. He's traveled to Gaza on several medical missions and recently spent 3 weeks volunteering at El Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. Since returning, he has spoken out about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the need for humanitarian aid and services to reach the people. He is an assistant clinical professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and the global health director for his emergency department. And people may remember him from walking out during a meeting with Joseph Biden. So we're going to be talking to him, of course, about that. So welcome, Thayer, Dr. Thayer Ahmad. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So I thought we could start out talking about the latest in what is happening right now in Gaza. And from both of your perspectives, Assal, you are someone who follows the political angle, and you do really great media analysis. I highly recommend that everyone follow Assal on Twitter. And Dr. Ahmad, you, of course, are a doctor, and you have seen firsthand, up close and personal, the effects of what is happening in Gaza, which is something that our government is, of course, facilitating. So let's just start with kind of a roundup of where we are.
I would start with Thayer, from someone who's actually been on the ground.
Been there,
Yeah, so I mean, with respect to what's happening, it's exactly what we thought would take place when we're talking about Rafah and an invasion into Rafah. The evacuation orders continue to expand. It started in eastern Rafah, has gone to central Rafah. We know that the Israeli military has breached central Rafah in many of the areas where NGOs were based and housed. So many people are either deciding that they're going to try to figure out where else to go in Gaza. So are they going to go back to Khan Yunis? And the images that we've seen come out of Khan Yunis in recent weeks have shown a city that's been totally leveled and destroyed. Are they going to try to go to central Gaza, Deir al-Balah, which is already overcrowded? Or are they going to stay put? And that's sort of the decision that people are having to make. Last weekend, the Memorial Day weekend, we know about the massacre that took place. But we also are hearing that several of the primary health clinics that were in Tel Sultan neighborhood, which is central Gaza, like our clinic, for example, the Med Global Nutritional Stabilization Center, it's been converted into a morgue because there's just nowhere to be able to take people. Anybody that's been wounded, it's hard to reach the main hospitals in the area. We know that Abu Yusuf al-Najjar Hospital, the largest hospital in Rafah, was told to evacuate, and so it's been shut down. We know that European Gaza Hospital, that's on the border between Khan Yunis and Rafah, nobody can reach there. It's not safe to be able to get to that place at all. And that we know even as of yesterday that the International Medical Corps, their field hospital, has been shut down. And so you're really putting the people in Rafah in this predicament that many NGOs were warning about as far back as March when we heard about a looming Rafah offensive. They got nowhere to go. There is no infrastructure to accommodate the internally displaced people. You're asking people who've been displaced 4 or 5 times to do it for a 6th or 7th time. And there are no healthcare facilities to treat the wounded as you're conducting a military operation. And so, it's exactly what we thought would take place. But really, the thing that pours salt on the wound and is really devastating is we know that the Israeli tanks have taken over the Rafah crossing, and that since May 6th, there has been no reliable way to get humanitarian aid in, to get humanitarian actors in, and there's no way to get people out of Gaza. Whether or not you've paid the $5,500 to the Hela service to get you from Gaza to Egypt, or you're a medical evacuee, the more than 10,000 that are in the Gaza Strip that we're trying to get out that need immediate medical evacuation. So that's still up in the air, and people are still trying to figure out how can we get some sort of supplies in, how can we get people out, and how can we bring more doctors in.
And what are some of the things, Thayer, that you feel like people need to know about what you saw when you were operating as a doctor?
Yeah, I mean, it's the fact that all of these incidents that make the news cycle for 24 hours or 36 hours, whether it's the tent massacre that we heard about the last weekend, or it's a Nasser hospital being sieged, destroyed, and many of the doctors being detained, that each single event that has taken place over the last 8 months has had a compounding effect on the humanitarian crisis. It's all working together against the people of Gaza. When we have the border shut down and we're not getting the medicines in, people are dying because they are not able to get the antibiotics for their infected wound. They somehow survived an airstrike on their house, but they're dying on the floor of a hospital because we don't have any sort of antibiotics. We don't have any pain medicines. None of the kids who, more than 625,000 who have not gone to school for 8 months, none of them are getting their childhood vaccinations. None of them are living a normal life. And there's a mental health crisis that's going to take generations for us to adequately address. And on top of that, just because you destroy the infrastructure and the homes are being bombed and the hospitals are being raided and destroyed and the university campuses are being leveled, it's not just about rebuilding. There's a human resources problem too. Many of the doctors that I worked with at Nasser Hospital are either in the mass graves that they dug up or they've been abducted and we have no idea where they are. One person that The Intercept talked about a couple of days ago, Dr. Khalid Assir. I worked side by side by Dr. Khalid. Young guy, early 30s, finished his specialization, brilliant surgeon, fantastic at his job, really funny to be around, witty guy, positive, attitude, and really felt a calling in serving his people. Could have easily went somewhere else, easily could have left the Gaza Strip. But he's been abducted since they raided Nasser Hospital, and nobody knows where he's been. And so, it's the fact that there is these tragedies that are layered within this main tragedy of besieging these people and bombing, the living daylights out of them. It's that every aspect of life in Gaza has been altered, damaged, or destroyed in a real way that's going to last for the foreseeable future. I think it's important to sort of connect the dots a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And Assal, what do you think are some of the most important things for us to talk about from the media perspective and the political perspective?
Well, first, I think it's genuinely hard to listen to what Thayer is describing, right? Like I'm sitting here trying to maintain some kind of composure while basically listening to someone describe hell on earth. And those are the stories that are not being told every single day. You mentioned the fact that, well, you know, the massacre on tents and refugees in Rafah, that got some media attention. Occasionally, something like mass graves will get some media attention. But basically, this daily horror is not getting mainstream media attention. The reason why people know these things are happening is because of people on the ground, like the reason why people know these things are happening is because of Palestinian journalists on the ground, who are sharing these videos. That's the only reason we know this is happening on a daily basis. And what's frustrating when you listen to it, when you listen to this sort of description of just the daily horrors that people are facing, there are people debating things like death tolls. We're not even talking about secondary death tolls, which is what was just described, right? People who are not, when you talk about a healthcare system collapsing, it's not just victims of war. It's not just war injuries that are affected. It's people whose daily health is affected. Things that you don't think about, lack of antibiotics and how that might lead to someone's death, children not getting their vaccines. Those are the things that are never talked about. The secondary consequences of the siege and the way that this war has been conducted on Gaza. And then when this is described by officials in the Biden administration as a limited operation, this is a limited operation where 1 million people have had to be evacuated again. And the word evacuation is not, they've fled. There's no evacuation. This has been, now we're being told not to believe people who are on the ground describing what is going on. We are being told not to believe the fact that everything that was just described has been echoed by officials in UNICEF, UN experts and UN aid workers, Doctors Without Borders, International Rescue Committee, all of the NGOs that are on the ground, every aid worker on the ground has been describing the same horror over and over again. And we are being told this is a limited operation. We are being told that this crosses no red lines. And on top of that, and I think this is something really important to contextualize, because they're brought up the closing of the Rafah crossing and how that has impacted humanitarian aid and food getting into Gaza. In the beginning of April, after Israel killed 7 World Central Kitchen workers, the uproar that caused, the international outcry, forced the Biden administration to have to actually say something. Now, what did they say at the time? They said, well, if we don't see action on the ground by Israel, then US policy will change. This is 2 months ago. In the month of May, we have seen aid nosedive, decline to a point where an already horrifying situation has gotten much worse. What policy has changed? None. This is the reality of it. We also saw at the beginning of May, this is now 1 month ago, Biden going on CNN and making a very big deal, talking about red lines, talking about if there's a major operation in Rafah, the word major being the key, because anything under the sun that is now happening is just described as limited. If they call it limited, then it doesn't require any action by the Biden administration. So to contextualize it, you have to also look at not only what is happening on the ground, but the way that it is being talked about, the way that it's not being talked about, and the way that Biden administration officials have tried to frame their inaction while pretending like they're taking action.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect transition. I wanted to show some clips. These are actually clips that you tweeted out, Assal. Let's take a look at Matthew Miller being asked precisely about whether or not Israel has committed war crimes and if that has had any effect on American policy. And he was asked that question by the journalist Humaira Pamuk.
Right. So you're just saying that we don't know if Israeli forces have committed war crimes in Gaza or not. You said we don't know.
I would go a bit further and say that we said we don't know the definitive answer to it, but the NSM 20 report said it's reasonable to conclude that they may have, given the sheer number of incidents, but we need to finish these processes to have definitive answers to the question.
So despite these assessments, you think there is no change in the U.S. policy to continue providing arms to Israel?
There is no change in our policy. As you know, we paused one shipment. We have not, but we have not changed our overall policy, and we will continue to support Israel's security.
Yeah, there you have it.
I mean, they're admitting essentially that the report, the NSM report they're talking about, uses the most vague language possible to basically say, even there you see in the clip, he says, it is reasonable to conclude that they may have committed war crimes. I mean, that's the most watered down language you could possibly use. And he says it himself in that clip because of the sheer volume, right? Because at a certain point, it becomes undeniable. And that's the pressure that the Biden admin is facing, mostly because we're in an election year, right? This is having a very real impact on their ability, on the ability of Biden to get reelected, because of key swing states and constituencies and polls that are showing that they take issue with his Gaza policy specifically. And so to remedy that, you see this kind of we are doing something about it language matched with absolutely no action.
Right. Yeah. Unbelievable. Thayer, do you have a response to that? If not, I have another thing I want to show that's equally infuriating.
The only thing is, I'd briefly say that there's incident after incident that takes place. The NSM 20 talks about all of these different incidents that have taken place. There's every single international NGO has a consensus with respect to violations of international humanitarian law and the targeting of journalists, of healthcare workers, the systematic attack on the healthcare infrastructure. And it's, response after response about let the process take place. Investigation, we'll see what the outcome looks like. The problem is now we're about to approach 8 months, it's, to me, it's clear that that's not working. And I just don't know if the urgency is there, or the fact that they're just not understanding the urgency that's being communicated. I don't understand, why that we're still sitting here talking about reports and we're talking about processes when it clearly hasn't worked. So I'm just, that confuses me when you're talking about the largest cohort of children who have lost at least one limb as a result of war, the most children that have been killed in the last 4 years in any other war zone combined. So, I mean, there's consequences to the fact of being purposely vague like they were in NSM 20. There's consequences to these press briefings where they're essentially giving political cover towards the Israelis. And I think that, I just don't understand what else we can expect from this administration. I mean, if the World Central Kitchen attacks, if the raiding of Nasser, if the destruction of Shifa, if everything that we've seen take place over the last 8 months, nothing has moved them to change policy, I don't know what will.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think something that's important about it is, well, first, in terms of confusion, it's the systematic dehumanization of Palestinians, the systematic dehumanization of Palestinians, of Arabs, of Muslims, right? The fact that the only way you can reconcile this logically is to say they are not seen as human beings. That's the only way to understand how is it that they're taking no action. And if you want a point of comparison, what happens when people are treated like they're human beings, within about 10 days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it took 10 days, if I'm not mistaken, I could give or take a few days. You already had Secretary of State Blinken saying that they have evidence that may constitute Russian war crimes. This is within 10 days. Within about 5 weeks, approximately, there were war crimes. It's not it may constitute. War crimes have been committed. This is according to the US. And Biden was using the language of genocide to describe what Putin was doing in Ukraine. We are now 8 months into this just slaughter of Gaza. And every response from the State Department is, well, there's a process. We have to let the process take place. And yet, or they'll use the phrase, well, we're still in the middle of a conflict. Still in the middle of a conflict. But for some reason, in the case of Russia, it was very easy to make the assessments. It was very quick to make the assessments. The US, in fact, gathered evidence to give to the ICC, the very institution that they undermined when that institution wanted to issue warrants for Israeli officials in order to prove that Putin was committing war crimes. So it's not just that we're saying that it's the distinction is in the group of people who are being affected. The distinction is there because we have seen this specific administration treat two groups of people entirely differently.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you just brought up the dehumanization because, Thayer, something I was struck by was when you were describing that doctor who has been abducted and you were saying he's funny, he's passionate, and I mean, I was like fighting back tears because it's just this humanity that we are not really presented about Palestinians. And it made me think of the way like the Auschwitz Twitter account will just tweet out facts about people who were killed. And it's always very moving. And it's like, this person enjoyed this. There they are with their family. I don't have any examples right now, or else I'd be more specific, but kind of like just humanizing people, reminding us of the details of people's humanity that gets so lost. And I wonder how, for each of you, you feel personally affected by that. Like, do you just feel invisibilized or pathologized or like discounted? And then we'll get back to the politics stuff. But I'm just curious on a more personal level how that affects you.
I mean, I'm Palestinian, and my parents came here in the 80s, and we've gone back over and over again. And I think unfortunately for some of us, it's become normalized in a way to be dehumanized. And I just remember standing in checkpoints. I remember kind of waiting under the sun, being herded like sheep. And then when you see something like Gaza happen, and then you hear about and you actually see some of these families that are ripped apart, and you see parents grieving over their children. You see like a mom wiping the face of her son who's just been killed, and you know that she's going to need to look for a place to bury her, and you can tell that it was her world. It just, for me, it's like, I just, right there, it's like you throw your hands up in this kind of, you're just like, I don't get it. Why are we not human enough where that, somebody can understand what she's going through? And even we grew up with what some of the phrases of former Israeli prime ministers would say, like, Palestinians will never forgive them for making us, murder
Yeah.
their children,
We'll
or
forgive them. What is it? We'll forgive them for killing our children, but not for making us kill theirs,
yeah, but
which is
exactly,
such
yeah,
a gaslighting,
yeah,
like,
absolutely. And
yeah.
that's and you hear that thrown around all the time, and it's always been something that you felt. But for me, what was really, or I struggled with when I was in Gaza and coming back, is the fact that I know that any decent human being, if they heard the sounds of a kid in an emergency department on the floor in pain, and knowing that I don't even have Tylenol to give him for his broken bones or the burns from the bomb, I know that every single person, if they just heard that, they all would feel the same way. They all would want to do something about that. And just that sort of deliberate attempt to remove those sounds and remove that sight from the general conscience of people who are in the West. For me, it's just like, I know what I'm up against. And I think it sucks to say that we're working on just so people can look at us the same way that they look at anybody else, to know that
Right.
we feel hungry the way they feel hungry, we grieve just like the way anybody else would grieve. And I hate that I have to say that out loud. That's what I
Yeah.
struggle with.
Yeah.
Well, I could say I am not Palestinian, nor am I Arab, but that
You are part of a group that is, well,
I'm part of
I
the
don't want to put
region.
words. Yeah, and that
No. But so people who look
demonized,
like us
yeah.
essentially are demonized in the same way. And I could say that Palestinians were humanized for me because some of my best friends are Palestinian. And that's what made me care about this issue. But actually, before that, when you talk about a personal impact, for me, the personal impact came from someone who at a very young age, as a college student, was sort of learning about the world and learning about specifically the role of my own government, right? As an American, the role that my government plays which is essentially the role, by the way, in this injustice. And that impact is quite different. There's the part of it where, you're part of that sort of clump of people who are dehumanized. But there's also the part of it where your country, your tax dollars, your, officials are directly responsible for this kind of just decades of injustice, decades of it. This is not new. This is not, what we're seeing right now, what we've seen in the last 8 months, I think, is horrifying and unprecedented on this issue, except for the Nakba itself in 1948. So we haven't seen anything like this from a historical perspective in that amount of time. But the fact that it's happened repeatedly, that Gaza has, what is it, mowing the lawn, the fact that it's been wiped out over and over again, the fact that thousands of Palestinians have been killed in Gaza multiple times over and over again, and that this has just been going on for as long as it has, I think that has been the impact for me, the lack of humanity in my own community. And by that community, I mean Americans. I mean our own country, right? And what's given me a little bit of hope is the fact that you see, especially a young generation, but even older Americans who are just sort of for the first time becoming aware of things, of what's going on. And I think we can attribute that to social media and the fact that they're seeing things that they have not seen before, because our officials and our government and our media does not tell that story.
Yeah. It's just, I think also as someone who, I mean, speaking personally from my perspective, as someone who was raised, I mean, I'm Jewish, I'm not religious, but I'm Jewish. And so much of what my social justice commitment, or so much of the reason that I care about the world, was grounded in never again. And seeing that instead of the never again lesson be used to stop more slaughter, seeing people distort never again to mean never again for these people only. And in order for this never to happen again, we're going to kill a lot of other people. Is just, it's so upsetting. It's like, it feels like such a manipulation of something that has so much potential to do good in the world. And we are going to look back at this time, and we're going to look back at the way, the doctor you brought up there, like we're going to look back at what happened to him, but also the fact that no one in the mainstream media or no politicians were saying anything about this person or saw him as important. And it just really, it's so haunting because it's so, how many times do we have to repeat this process until people get it? Sorry, I just, that's, yeah. But I want to go back to, unfortunately, back to Joe Biden. I wanted to read something that he said in a recent interview with Time Magazine. So I'm gonna quote the article. Asked if Israeli forces have committed war crimes in Gaza, Biden said, quote, "It's uncertain," end quote. From the start, the administration knew Israel was pushing the limits of legal warfare. The Washington Post and others have reported. The conflict is driving a wedge between the U.S. and its allies. On May 31st, Biden laid out a phased ceasefire plan that would end the war and secure the release of hostages. He has continued to pursue the complicated regional deal with Saudi Arabia. Some close to Biden say the only holdout to the broader pact is Netanyahu. The president declines to say as much, but when asked by Time if Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political reasons, Biden admits there is every reason for people to draw that conclusion. So, how is it that he's defending and enabling and facilitating this war, which is already inexcusable, but on top of that, he's doing something that he knows is politically motivated? And he just said it out loud.
I mean, if you ask anybody in Gaza from the beginning of this war about what Netanyahu's intentions were and how keeping the war going on and even a broader regional conflict plays into him staying in power, they all would have told you that this is the case. They all would have told you this is, this is what's at play here, that you have an extremist, fragile, right-wing coalition that's hanging on by, by a thread, and the fact that there's an ongoing war, as long as that war can persist and that you can continue to warmonger, this guy is not going to leave power. I think everybody in Gaza suspects that the day that the war is over is the day that it's the end of Netanyahu's political career, that he's going to be held accountable for the attacks on October 7th, and that he's going to go by the wayside. And so it makes sense that you have a prime minister here who wants the war to end, who wants the war to continue, who wants to extend the conflict with Lebanon and Hezbollah as well as Iran. I mean, it's clear, and the comments are there. What strikes me as bizarre is that this is something that it seemed like the Democratic Party with Senator Schumer saying that we need to have a new leader, time for Netanyahu's to go, it's time to go. Nancy Pelosi, all people who you could never argue are against, or are not supporters of the state of Israel. Strong supporters, strong allies, always there voting the way that they're supposed to vote. What's really bizarre is to see that Schumer sign a letter inviting Netanyahu to Congress. And this is a guy that you said should be fired. And you're
Yeah,
signing your name
exactly.
to a letter
He's
inviting
not
him in.
acting in the best interest of Israel. Yeah.
Exactly. So to me, I don't know. I actually I would love to hear what you guys have to think about that. But to me, it suggests either that that this guy is not going anywhere, and you're coming to terms with that, and you're about facing in a very embarrassing way as the Senate Majority Leader, or that there's that the war is going to continue, like the Israelis are saying, towards the end of the year, and Netanyahu's holding out for the November election, hoping that he gets a lame duck president, so he can achieve all of these insane objectives that he set forward. But I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Assal, you go, because I know you have to go soon. So I'll pass you the mic.
Well, I would say that I would agree with everything that they're said, and then add that they're just not going to, someone like Schumer is not going to not invite a Israeli prime minister. It can be anybody, right? It's just when there's an ideological basis behind the kind of support that you see, right? This is something we rarely talk about. We rarely talk about ideological extremism in the United States. We're always talking about it about somewhere else. But this is the definition of ideological extremism, right? It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter what they do. They can commit genocide. Doesn't matter. We're going to invite you here. You can be Schumer and say, hey, this guy is a huge problem for, I mean, he didn't call him a war criminal, but he will say he's a problem for Israel.
Right.
Because
of course.
they
That was
try
the only
to
framing of it, is how it affects Israel, right?
Exactly, right? It's not going to be, and it plays into this idea that the problem is Netanyahu, right? It's this individual character. It's not the entire functioning of the state of Israel and why it has functioned the way that it has for decades before Netanyahu was in power and throughout the entire period that he's been in and out of power. And by the way, in a very parallel way of the way that we talk about Trump in the United States, as if it's this individual person and not an entire system that creates that individual person, right? So that's one way that Schumer tries to talk about it. But of course he's going to invite him, because because this is what blind, zealous kind of thinking does. It doesn't matter who the person is or what they do. That's still the prime minister of Israel. And of course they're going to be welcome in the United States. Of course they're going to be welcome to address the US Congress while they're on trial for genocide in the world's highest court. It's insane to say these things out loud, but that's the situation we find ourselves in. So I think when you look at Biden's comments, I think the confusion constantly comes from this understanding that the policy is costing them. So in trying to balance the rhetoric without the action, and even and I wanted to bring this up too, the ceasefire thing, right? The extremely confusing idea of what is the ceasefire? Whose proposal is it? What is it? Why does that? Think about the timing, right? Think about the timing of when Biden unveils. First of all, why is the US president unveiling an Israeli proposal? That seems odd in and of itself. But what is the timing of this? Well, you're looking at last week after the massacre in Rafah, after the Biden administration has to come out and say, actually, that didn't cross any red lines. Massacring civilian refugees in tents doesn't cross a red line. After the fact that the Rafah crossing has been closed for all these weeks and the aid situation is just spiraling out of control, while the ridiculous pier that the US was building, which was never going to be effective, has proven to be comically worse than what people thought, because it sank, right? So so in this context, Biden unveils a ceasefire plan because he has to distract from the fact that he's taken no action on the things that he was supposed to take action on. And why is it framed the way that it is? From the very beginning and every day since, and this is from Biden officials over and over again, and from other Western leaders, Hamas must accept, Hamas must accept. This is all, the ball is in Hamas's court. This is all about Hamas accepting, because this is Israel's proposal, even though there's so many conflicting reports that no one can make heads or tails of what's actually going on. Yeah. But they are actually gaslighting the public in a way that I've in months of being sort of treated like we're either stupid or crazy. This has reached a new level, because no matter how many times the prime minister of Israel says what Biden said is not accurate, what Biden said, there are gaps. This was the news yesterday.
Yeah, we actually have your tweets on this. Let's show your tweets, because you, as usual, pointed this out very well. Brad, she tweeted screenshots out. Okay, so yeah. So here you have NBC News headline: Biden's description of ceasefire offer not accurate, Israel official tells NBC. And under that, you have Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield saying, today, the United States circulated a new UN Security Council resolution supporting the proposal now on the table to end the fighting in Gaza. To a ceasefire and hostage deal. Numerous leaders and governments, including in the region, have endorsed the plan, and we call on the Security Council to join them in calling for the implementation of this deal without delay and without further conditions. And then you show that, then you show the other screenshot, and you tweet. So the White House is saying, no, sorry, this is the other one. Nope, one more. She had tweeted something above.
This works too. It's the same concept of the headlines.
Yeah. So here's another example, right? Times of Israel reports Netanyahu reportedly tells MK's members of Knesset there are gaps between Israel's proposal and terms presented by Biden. And you describe this as kind of humorously as gaslighting. So, yeah.
Well, because if you look at the next post, the White House denies that there are gaps. So how, I mean, this is just like, this is beyond reason, right? You want to reasonably say that this is a proposal by Israel. Israel is telling you, Israel is saying that what Biden presented is not accurate, and or there are gaps, right? All the different ways that it's been described. And the White House is saying, no, there aren't. How can the White House say that there aren't gaps for Israel's proposal when Israel is the one who is saying that there are gaps? I'm telling you, it's like we've reached this point where they don't even care how ridiculously obvious it looks. It's today in a press briefing with the State Department, spokesperson Matthew Miller was asked by Niall
we have that. Do you want us to? You set it up, then we'll show the clip.
Basically, he was asked, because there's so much confusion around the proposal, he broke it down to say, are you basically saying that Hamas is supposed to sign off on their own dissolution?
Right. Yeah.
And that's what Miller is saying.
Mentioned the president's remarks, which included the idea that as long as Hamas lives up to its commitment, there could be, and I quote, the cessation of hostilities permanently. And you say that is an Israeli proposal. So the government of the state of Israel is signed up to a proposal that there could be a permanent end to hostilities and Hamas still in existence in a meaningful way.
No, they are signed up to an agreement that leads to a permanent cessation of hostilities, but with a number of provisions that have to be negotiated to get there at the end of the phase.
But if the provisions...
But I say, I'm not going to negotiate all those provisions in public. I've talked about this a good deal yesterday, about the fact that one of the principles the secretary outlined in Tokyo in November is that there cannot be continued rule of Hamas in Gaza after October 7th. I'm sorry, after the end of this conflict, and that's what we're committed to.
No, but I understand that, but if the provisions required would be the dissolution of Hamas, why would Hamas sign up to get that ball rolling?
Because they don't want to see continued conflict, continued Palestinian people dying. They don't want to see war in Gaza. They want to see reconstruction of Gaza. Now, look, I will grant you one thing. I said this to Matt yesterday. It may be that Sinwar decides that he is safe in a tunnel and his interests have diverged from the people of Gaza. And so he's not willing to agree to a ceasefire, and he's not willing to look at this proposal and say it requires good faith negotiations to get from phase 1 to phase 2. So I'm not going to accept it because I'm safe and I don't have any interest in the Palestinian people who continue to suffer the ravages of war. But I will say, if you look at the deal that's on the table, it is manifestly in the interest of the Palestinian people, is manifestly in the interest of the Israeli people, is manifestly in the interest of the world. And so that's why we'll continue to push for it. And if Hamas really does represent the interests of the Palestinian people, as they say over and over, it's without a doubt that they'll take this deal.
I have some. Well, so what are your thoughts on that? And then I'll add mine now.
I think the very end when he says his last statement is kind of the funniest part. He says, if Hamas really, they say they represent the Palestinian people. If they do, then they would take this deal. Well, the Biden administration has said over and over that they want a ceasefire. And if they did, they wouldn't have vetoed it over and over again. Right. So it's just this constant doublespeak that you're dealing with when they're talking. They also say that this deal, which is extremely confusing because there's no description of what happens between phase 1 and phase 2, right? Well, that has to be negotiated. But then what kind of an agreement is it? Then really, what it is a 6-week ceasefire, which is what's been proposed over and over again, which is what everybody takes issue with because the entire point is to get a permanent ceasefire. If you say the permanent ceasefire is contingent on negotiations that have not even taken place yet, what new deal are you offering? There is no new proposal, which is why the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, has repeatedly said, our objectives have not changed. Our policy, our conditions have not changed. So that it's being presented as something new that on one hand is exactly what they've said over and over again, and on the other hand is nearly identical to what Hamas already agreed to weeks ago, right? It doesn't make sense, and there's this sort of refusal to clarify what's going on. And so we're just being told over and over again, this is the best deal on the table. This is Israel's proposal. And even when there's pushback from Israel, it's on Hamas. Now, what's the logic behind that? The logic behind it is, so if it doesn't happen, guess who gets blamed? And all of a sudden the narrative shifts, right? It's not about massacres in Rafah. It's not about Biden's red lines. It's not about a humanitarian crisis. All of that will suddenly be blamed on Hamas and Hamas alone because they've unveiled this plan that has no clear parameters.
Right. Also, it makes no sense because these are people, when I say these are people, I mean the Biden administration. Biden called Hamas unadulterated evil, right? If Hamas is unadulterated evil, then why would they expect them to accept this?
Well, the thing is when Biden was making his comments originally on Friday, he doesn't, the idea that phase 2 would be a negotiation between Israel and Hamas, but then that the ultimate goal is the eradication of Hamas is in and of itself a very paradoxical position to take, which is why you get Niall asking that question. It's like, but how does that negotiation process make sense? And ultimately, isn't that what Israel has been saying all along? In the same speech on Friday, Biden also basically says that Israel's goal of sort of eradicating Hamas is not an attainable goal, right? It's not an obtainable objective, and yet that's the objective that Israel has. So then what happens? What happens is this? Let's play it out for a minute. Everybody agrees. Okay, there's a 6-week ceasefire, and now they're negotiating phase 2. Well, all Israel has to say is, we haven't eradicated Hamas. Until we eradicate Hamas, we have the right to defend ourselves. That's not a ceasefire. That's a temporary ceasefire, which has been the problem all along. And this is the most interesting part, and I'll end with this for myself. Israel has accused everyone of being Hamas.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? What does the eradication of Hamas mean meaningfully, right? What does it mean? Does it mean that every Hamas member, and that's in and of itself a problem, who is a Hamas member? Every Hamas member is what? They have to leave Gaza, and where do they go? Are they arrested? Are they what happens to these people who you're talking about eradicating? Are they all killed? Like, what does that mean? That hasn't been described. And then who is Hamas has not been clearly defined, because Israel wants to designate UNRWA as a terrorist organization. Would that mean then that the eradication of UNRWA is included as part of the eradication of Hamas?
I'm sure
they've accused the United Nations of being colluding with Hamas, the World Health Organization of colluding with Hamas, South Africa of being a legal arm for Hamas. So when you talk about these terms in such vague, with such vague wording, it allows Israel to indefinitely continue the war under the guise of a ceasefire, which makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, and they've also compared Hamas to Nazis and ISIS. And people will actually say those things out loud as if they're logical things. Before you go, Assal, just Firmer asked, how does Biden's deal differ from deal Hamas proposed 2 months ago?
I honestly, so the issue is we haven't seen, or I haven't seen at least, the details or report of the details that would be able to compare the two. What the language that the Biden admin is using is that it is nearly identical. And in fact, in yesterday's State Department press briefing, Associated Press reporter Matt Lee asked Matthew Miller this very question. He said, well, okay, nearly identical. What does that mean? And the responses, again, are vague in a way that it doesn't really explain to us what, if it's nearly identical, then what's the difference? Then why did Israel reject it then, but now all of a sudden Israel will accept it? So that near identical is vague enough. And you have to understand, in legal language, that's the intention, right? You intentionally use vague language in order to later justify in a legal basis what is okay. So if you make it vague enough, then it's like, well, it's technically different, but it gives Israel the ability, and this is according to Israel itself, it gives Israel the ability to continue the war until its objectives are met. And when those objectives themselves are vague, it really lays the groundwork for them to be able to just continue doing exactly what they've been doing this entire time.
Yeah. Assal, thank you so much for joining. I know you have to run off, and Taylor, I'm going to keep talking to you if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for having me, and it was great to share the space with Thayer, especially. And
likewise, thank you, Assal.
Just to say thank you for everything that you are doing and for sharing these stories. They're so important.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So we actually have a question for you, Thayer, from Azuru Marai. Question for Dr. Ahmad. Is there any effort to get you and other Gaza volunteers before Congress? Admin spokespeople can lie all they want, need testimony under oath.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the goal for sure. We've definitely met with as many congressional offices as possible. We've spoken to the State Department, Department of Defense, National Security Council. We had a brief meeting with the White House, but that's exactly right. We definitely want to at least document for the historical record the eyewitness testimonies that we have, as well as some of the data that we've gathered, and we want it to be in the record, and we want to do it before Congress. But there's been, I think it's been really tough to be able to get that space. I like to say that the people we've been speaking to thus far have been friendlies, people who at least understand the depth of the humanitarian crisis. They get that something needs to stop, that there needs to be a ceasefire. We've had little to no engagement with people who not only, I'll say, may not see eye to eye, but also people who want to stay out of the conversation, people who want to avoid the politics of it. But yeah, I mean, that's, of course, I mean, that's a lot of what we're doing now. Many people like myself who've been on the ground, we at the very minimum want to be able to document for the historical record what we saw, as well as the pictures that we've taken and the stories that we've heard.
And tell us about this meeting that you had with Biden and that you walked out of.
Yeah, I mean, it was right after the World Central Kitchen attack. 7 people were killed. And the week leading up to it, the White House always has an annual Ramadan iftar that they try to host. And they knew that this year most people would not show up. I mean, to say that, I know we've been reduced to the Palestinian American, the Arab American, the Muslim American community has been reduced to, I think, this derogatory term, like one issue voter. I take offense at that, because really what it is, this is something that's so important, what's happened in Gaza over the last 8 months. It's something that has resonated with all sorts of different people who, just people of conscience, people, with progressive values, people who have any sort of moral fiber. They've all taken objection to this. And this community is in that group of people. So they knew that not a lot of people were going to be showing up to the Ramadan iftar. What they tried to do is they said, let's do a working dinner. And it's pitched as this working dinner with high-level officials, and access to people like the president, who have not heard from people who've been on the ground since October 7th, which was baffling to me, that he had not heard from anybody who had actually been on the ground, or experts who have been on the ground. The vice president was going to be there, Jake Sullivan was going to be there, Linda Thomas Greenfield is going to be there. This is a can't miss opportunity. It's the who's who in the Biden administration. You got to get in there and tell your stories, and hope that you can at least, get them to empathize with what's taking place, or kind of make that human connection. I mean, this is really how it was built. but everything in that week suggested that that was not the case. I mean, the fact that the State Department had tried to quietly transfer more arms, that there was a fighter jet sale that CNN had reported on, all of these things were like, okay, this is not serious. It's not a serious meeting. I don't want to just not show up because I just at least want to kind of express the discontent and the anger that the community is feeling, and I want it to be visceral. And so we showed up, and it's a round table, and there's a few other people who've been invited there, a handful of people, maybe five maximum. And then you see all of these players walk in, Jake Sullivan, John Feiner, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Linda Thomas Greenfield, a few other admin people. And the president right away is like, I'm not going to say much. It's basically, we want to hear from you guys. It's a listening session. Just trust us that we're working on this. And I mean, I went first and I had told everybody I was gonna go first and say what I had to say. And I was like, this Rafah situation cannot happen. I mean, keep in mind, this is in April that I'm having this. Don't let them go into Rafah. Here's a letter from an orphan begging you not to let them go into Rafah. Her family was killed in Khan Yunis. They rushed over to the southernmost part of Gaza because that's where they were told to go. Don't let it happen. And then I looked at some of the other officials on the table, and I said, a temporary ceasefire is cruel. Like, you can't for 6 weeks let food come in, feed hungry people, and then start bombing them. The Israelis are trying to say there's no famine in the north, and that there's all of these things happening in the hospitals. It's all lies. And if you are serious about that, I know a long list of people who've been in Gaza since before October 7th who can tell you and can bear witness to what they saw and how none of that is true. And I actually said something that, with respect to the fact that they were vetoing these resolutions at the UN. But I was there the week after they had abstained and allowed that one resolution to pass. But the same State Department officials that you just played, whether it was Matt Miller or even it was John Kirby, undermining it, saying it's non-binding.
Lying right away, just
Yeah,
lying
exactly.
through their
Yeah.
teeth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's non-binding. Who cares? Whatever it is. So I'm like, why are you
What's the
guys here
point?
trying to play these games? They assume that everybody is just I just feel like there's this condescension when they talk about, oh, we're making moves. And there's also this assumption
Having
that
tough
people are
conversations.
yeah, exactly. So I just got up and I said, out of respect for everything that's taken place in Gaza and the people that I interacted with and the community here that's heartbroken and that's suffering, I got to walk away from you. I got to walk away from this table. I said, the only thing we agree on is about this death toll inaccuracy. But I know for sure, having been there, that those numbers are astronomically higher than what they're being reported as. I know there's people still trapped beneath the rubble. I know that there's people that we haven't even heard about. And I don't even want to mention some of the people that are dying for medical reasons because of the blocking of aid, which to me is they're casualties of war as well. So got up, walked away, and it just so happened that there was a protest because people had thought there was going to be an actual like a ceremony and a dinner. So
Right.
people were protesting outside. There was media there, and then they saw me walking out, and thankfully there was a lot of there was a lot of attention about that whole thing about Rafah. But I mean, I'm here today with you, and unfortunately, we couldn't stop a Rafah offensive. There was this red line that's been crossed. There's been all of the things that have taken place over the last several weeks, and so I think to get back to just the last segment that you had when we were talking about this ceasefire proposal and what does it mean. What's notably missing too is the fact that the Israelis have control of the Philadelphia corridor. They have the control of the border between Egypt and Palestine. And does a ceasefire mean that they're going to withdraw? Are they still going to be in control of this border? What does it mean for being able to recover in the day after? And I don't think we have an answer. And I think it's because that answer is not being shared with the Israelis are not sharing that answer with the American counterparts, what their goals are. And one last thing that I find very peculiar, we talk about the pier and how it was destroyed. According to the defense of the DoD, the budget for it is around 340 million. It's just so bizarre to me that that's the budget because that's exactly how much the U.S. contribution was annually to UNRWA, the place that they
Right.
decided to defund, right? So it's like clear they want to put UNRWA, they want to cast them to the side. Who's going to be running this pier? Who distributes the aid? The Israelis keep telling us that it's going to be them, that they're the ones who are going to be in charge. They're going to handle everything. And so again, it goes to the point that we've made here already. It's like it's just there's so much vagueness, and it only serves to perpetuate the violence that's in Gaza right now, it only serves to deepen the humanitarian crisis in a really awful way.
Yeah, and just speaking of UNRWA, I've said this a few times, but they're just levels of evil because at least the other countries who totally irresponsibly said that they were going to stop funding UNRWA, at least once it was revealed that Israel had no evidence that UNRWA had a bunch of terrorists teaming around in it, at least they reversed their decision, but
And
not the
resume funding.
U.S.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
The U.S. has locked it out for a year. They
Yeah,
committed
at
to
least
that.
2025. I
Yeah.
mean, this is, people need to recognize that UNRWA's, they've got the most shelters. They're the biggest healthcare provider in the Gaza Strip outside of the Ministry of Health. They employ the most, they're the largest employer of Gazans. They are also involved in education. With COVID, they helped with COVID vaccines. I mean, you're talking about a quasi-government. So you just
Yep.
defunded them. You really take them out at the knees. And again, what does that mean? What's the next steps? It's just more heartache and suffering for Palestinians in Gaza. I mean,
Right.
that's what it results in.
It's so disgusting, and we know that these confessions were gotten through torture. Again, there was no evidence. There was torture that used to elicit false confessions. And even if there had been, like, the allegation was 14 of them had done something on October 7th. Let's say that were true. Well, that was, I think, 0.002% of
Right.
UNRWA.
13,000 employees, in
Yeah.
Gaza.
Yeah. So why don't you, if that's enough to defund UNRWA, you don't think that we could find, obviously we could find a much higher percentage of Israeli soldiers committing acts of terrorism.
Well,
They
Katie,
should defund the IDF.
we already said that, didn't we? Didn't we say there's a battalion in the IDF that is clearly commit war crimes and
Yeah.
that they were considering sanctioning them? I mean,
Right.
like, that's the U.S. saying that about battalions within the Israeli military. Not to mention settler extremists that they wanted to specifically sanction. And
Right.
so, yeah, to me, it's like, all right, if you're gonna play this game, you should be consistent at least, because otherwise it undermines
course.
everything that you're saying, and nobody
Right.
can take you at face value.
But it's such a joke. I mean, it is such a joke. And I wanted to ask you, as a doctor, what your thoughts are on the Israeli doctors who signed that letter months ago now, but it still haunts me. Signed this letter basically encouraging the IDF to attack hospitals.
I mean, it's disgusting. Honestly, it's disgusting. They're an embarrassment to the profession. I mean, the fact that you would even try to mix this sort of what's happening at these hospitals in a really horrific way, where you're talking about patients that every single doctor tries to treat, patients who are hooked up to IVs, are on a hospital cart, are suffering from infections or injuries or whatever it is. You're suggesting it's okay for these people to die. If they're on a ventilator, it's okay for them to suffocate to death. It's okay to absolutely destroy the infrastructure of a hospital, kill the doctors and the nurses. Why? Because of a political objective or a military aim that you want to accomplish? It's a joke. I mean, there is no respectable person. I'm a director of medical ethics for our emergency department. That is totally against bioethics. It goes against everything that everybody stands for when it comes to medical neutrality. I mean, these guys, I don't know how they can justify it. I
should
don't even
lose
know
their
how they're able to
licenses.
sleep at night. But
Yeah.
it's, and I should call out, I mean, it's not just Israeli doctors. I need to call out the silence of American professional societies, the American Medical Association, the American College of Emergency Physicians. All of these different professional societies have been silent on this. And the hypocrisy is really loud, because if they were quiet about Ukraine when their hospitals were being attacked, then I'd understand. I say, okay,
They
they're
have
just trying.
a certain consistency or
Exactly.
whatever. They
Yeah,
just
they're
follow a
trying to
certain, yeah,
defer. Maybe they want to
sure.
defer to humanitarians or human rights, whatever. But they were so loud and so quick in condemning what was happening to Ukrainian hospitals. And hey, I'm with that. Absolutely. Hospitals need to be sanctuaries.
Yeah.
But for you to be silent on what's happening in Gaza, what's happening to doctors and nurses, to paramedics, I mean, what the hypocrisy is insane. There's no moral consistency. There is no principled approach by any of these organizations. And it goes back to this idea: is it because you don't value the life of a Palestinian, of a Middle Easterner, of a Muslim, of an Arab, of a Persian, whatever it is? I mean,
Yeah.
is that what we're dealing with here? And so, I mean, we're seeing it across the board. And something that people in Gaza would always tell me is, this is, essentially what they would say in Arabic is like, this is the litmus test, right? Like, if you can at least look at what's happening to Gaza and have some sort of compassion and recognize that maybe it's not okay what's taking place there, that's the litmus test of whether or not you actually have some moral values that you're willing to kind of stick to, that you're actually
Right.
standing on something. And so, there's a saying in Arabic too that you either live free or you at least die standing up. And the idea is that you die standing on the principles that you believe in. And that's it reminds me of one doctor I definitely want to mention is Dr. Hussam Abu Safia. He's in the north, and he has Kazaki citizenship. His wife is Kazaki, and he's got 4 kids. He could have left on October 8th or on October 9th. He could have easily been evacuated out, and he's still there to this day at Kamal Adwan Hospital. He set up the only nutritional stabilization center in the north of Gaza when those kids were starving to death. They were dying in his hospital, and I just heard from him 2 days ago about how the hospital generator was destroyed and was struck. And the last message he sent me was, "We're cleaning it up. We're getting everything back up to speed. We'll open our doors tomorrow. We'll open our doors tomorrow." I mean, those are the kind of people that are there in the Gaza Strip. These are the doctors that these other Israeli doctors are condemning to death. I mean, these are the types of people that are there. They've got every exit. But Dr. Hassam is going to stand on his principles, on his belief that he's not going to desert his patients. He's not going to desert the kids that need his help. And I just hope that for me, I'm solely focused on trying to get the stories of the people in Gaza out in a way that at least can result in meaningful change on the ground. I want people to hear about them. I want them to know their names because I truly believe they're some of the best people on earth. And I think if people got a chance to just go to that second layer and get an idea of who they are, they wouldn't stand for what's happening, or they wouldn't be, oblivious to it.
And do you have? I heard some children, I think, in your around you.
Yeah,
Do you
sorry.
have? Do you? No, it's okay. Do
Mhm.
you have children?
Yeah, I've got 2 daughters. I've got a 3-year-old and I've got a 6-month-old.
So, what was it like for you to decide to go to Gaza? I mean, were you worried that you could leave and be killed there?
I mean, I'll tell you something that our community has been dealing with. And I live in Chicago, and I live in an area called Little Palestine because we've got the largest amount of Palestinians, largest Palestinian diaspora in Chicago in the United States. And so um, it's been agonizing sitting at home watching the social media clips, watching the videos, being glued to the news, trying to figure out what's happening. So when I had the opportunity to be able to get in and kind of do something with my hands, it was a no-brainer, and I think the whole community rallied behind me. And when you look at these kids that are suffering there in Gaza, I mean, I see my kids. They look the same. And Palestinian family culture is like. I know that every Friday everybody gets together, grandmas, grandparents, uncles, aunts, everybody gets together. They try to share a meal together. I know, I can at least relate on a level of what it means when you're watching parents have to bury their kids, or kids running around crying, asking where their dads are. And I just had to be there, and I know that the whole community felt like they got to go with me. And it's funny because I remember while I was there, I was getting blasted just messages of just checking in, are you okay, from everybody, people who I've never met. Just I know that they know that they're Palestinian like me, and they're saying, "Hey, I'm so and so. I'm just checking in. Please, if you need anything, or if your family needs anything, we'll take care of them." And coming back, they were the first people that really wanted me to report back on what was taking place. So I didn't do any interviews. Went straight to the local mosque, and it was a group of 500 people, and they all were asking questions about, tell us exactly what people are going through and what things are like. And so it's just it's this tight knit community that spans borders. Everybody's kind of in on it together. They understand what's taking place, and unfortunately, there's a tremendous amount of survivor's guilt because I'm living here. I'm in my office, in my house. I still got the roof over my head. The air condition is on, and the lights are on, and I know that what's going on in Gaza, and I know the conditions that people are living in. And all of us here, all of us, even my family in the West Bank, there's this survivor's guilt, right? It's hard to have graduation parties, to have weddings. It's hard to kind of, live life normally. And so I think that factored into why you've seen probably so many doctors willing to risk and go into the Gaza Strip. They feel like it's a duty. You've got to do it. I mean, you get this opportunity, you have to do it. And if there were engineers, Palestinian engineers here who could go in and start contributing to the reconstruction, you'll see a line of them ready to go in the next day and teachers or whatever it is. I know everybody wants to contribute in whatever way they can, and so I feel privileged that I happen to be a doctor that was able to get access. I feel honored that I was able to be side by side with my Palestinian colleagues. And now I feel this tremendous burden that I have to get that word out. I have to get the story out. I can't rest. And so I'm trying to do that.
Yeah. And any final words from you so we can let you go enjoy your night with your family and also get out these important stories?
Thank you. No, I mean, the last thing that I think is important, at least to acknowledge, is again, all of these people who have lost their lives trying to do the right thing, trying to share the stories. And I mentioned there are over 450 doctors and nurses who've been killed. There are over 100 journalists, over 200 UN workers who have been killed. We know about the humanitarian workers that have been killed in this process. I mean, these people are incredible because to me, they're these heroes that risked their lives, that were killed in the process. And whatever it is, if you're able to, kind of hear about whether it was the paramedics trying to save Hind, the 6-year-old girl that was trapped in the car, or the paramedics that were trying to retrieve some of the bodies in Rafah that their ambulances were struck. I mean, I hope that we can one day honor them in the way that they deserve to be honored. And so, if anybody's aware of any sort of stories like that, continue to share them, continue to amplify those voices, continue to amplify their stories. People deserve to know who they were.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for speaking with us, but also for all the work that you do. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Katie. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great. And have a great night. And we'd love to have you back on.
Anytime. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Guys, this has been so amazing. I'm very moved by those two guests that we spoke to, especially Dr. Ahmad, obviously, I mean, just literally risking his life to go to Palestine. It's amazing. But don't go anywhere, guys, because we have another segment that we're doing. We have 2 more guests, and I'm so excited. We're going to shift gears. We're going to talk about Mexico and the recent election of Claudia Sheinbaum. And but I also want to invite people, nudge them to please like this. Guys, give us some thumbs up if you're enjoying this. And I know you are, because I know you're not all hate watching, and give it a thumbs up. So I'm about to bring on to the stage. They're both making their Katie Halper show debuts. So things are really going to change. We are bringing on to the show Miguel Angeles, who is a journalist who's collaborated with Mexican media such as Vogue, Rolling Stone, Milenio, Aire Libre, and currently at ADN 40 and Heraldo Radio. Welcome, Miguel. Hi, Mikey. All right, I know you as Mikey. Good, you?
I'm so happy to be here with you. I love the Katie Halper show, and it's an honor to be invited.
And we're also being joined by Jose Luis Granado Ceja, who is a writer and photojournalist based in Mexico City. He previously worked as a staff writer for Telesur and currently works as a freelancer whose stories focus on contemporary political issues, particularly those that involve grassroots efforts to affect social change. And he often covers the work of social and labor movements in Latin America. So welcome, Jose Luis.
Hello. It's really good to be here.
Thank you so much for joining.
Big fan of the show. I'm so glad to be invited. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I want to ask both of you to put the election of Claudia Sheinbaum into context. Is this a victory? Is this an unmitigated victory? Is this a victory with certain limitations? How do you see what just happened? And I should add, by the way, she made history. She's the first woman to become president of Mexico and the first Jewish person to become president of Mexico. It could have been me, but she beat me.
I mean, if you want, I can start.
Sure.
I think that it's definitely a victory in terms of political representation. We and in this case, Jose Luis won. I don't think he will deny what I'm going to say, but the woman movement, the feminism fourth wave, as it's been called, that started back many years ago, but in 2020 had kind of an impressive way of a repercussion. You know, this movement has been making us in Mexican society that you may know it's a very classist and machist. The macho culture is something that we deal all the time with. You know, we're still the country that 11 women are beaten and dead every single day. the fact that a woman it's becoming the first president, not only in Mexico, Katie, in North America. It's not even the state has ever had a woman as a president. So I may say this is a victory. We cannot say anything about that, but there's a lot of things that we can actually let's say discuss about, of things that she has done, things that she may have on her agenda, and question from the society, that she must have to acknowledge at some point, and that at the moment she hasn't been able to do so, maybe for political reasons, but basically for me it's a victory.
Nice.
Absolutely. I mean, it's undeniable. I think the significance of that. I was actually speaking with the person who played the role helping to organize young women in her campaign the night of the election. And she told me that, this is a tribute to our great-grandmothers, our grandmothers, that not only are women being elected into political office, but actually being elected into the highest office of the land. But I would actually highlight her political program. I think it's one thing for a woman to be elected, and absolutely in a country like Miguel Angel has told us about is very much still dealing with a lot of sexist, macho kind of attitudes. But in this election, it was actually pretty much boiled down to two women. In fact, we had the government bloc, the pro-government bloc, the Morena-led coalition, as represented by Claudia Sheinbaum, and then on the opposition right-wing coalition by Xochitl Gálvez. So there was a third candidate, Jorge Álvarez Mañez, but he was always a distant third. It was not
never
going to win. But between these two, I think the point that I would highlight is this is a woman who represents a movement that has very much successfully transformed Mexico. It wasn't just a squeaker of a victory. It was an overwhelming victory. In fact, Morena, the party that is in power now, that Claudia Sheinbaum belongs to, had proposed the possibility of winning a supermajority in order to engage in deep reforms of the country to continue what the current president calls the fourth transformation of Mexico. And they succeeded. And I think even that surprised some of the people within the party. It was always kind of talked about as a possibility, but actually definitely in the lower house of Congress, they've secured that supermajority. And that speaks to the level of support that exists in this country. It's undeniable. She beat her rival by 2-1 margin. So there is very enthusiastic support for Morena in this party. And very briefly, I'd like to say why. We've seen a dramatic increase in the quality of life of working class people, of the poor, of the campesinos, a sharp increase in the minimum wage. We've seen 5 million people lifted out of poverty in the last 3 years. We've seen the reinvestment of the country's natural resources into the population. And I think that in a lot of ways helps explain why we had the result that we saw on Sunday, of having this monumentous victory that very much consolidates a new regime in Mexico. I think oftentimes elections, there can be a change in office. Here in Mexico, we talk about the modern democratic history of Mexico, where in the year 2000, the 71-year rule of the Institutional Revolutionary Party was ended by the election of Vicente Fox. But that democratic transition, unfortunately, didn't actually translate into a lot of differences for the vast majority of the country. And whereas in 2018, and now we're seeing in 2024, the population feels that these political representatives, as represented by Morena, are actually engaging in that transformation. I think that's the key thing I would highlight. Not just a woman, but a woman on a progressive platform that did a really good job as mayor of Mexico City, and we hope will do a good job as president of the country.
Yeah. And I mean, she ran on also being like AMLO's predecessor, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, AMLO played a big role in this election. It was very much, I wouldn't say it was like a referendum on López Obrador, but definitely that was the key thing. Do people want to continue with that political program, or do people want to vote for the opposition and go back to the previous regime? And then we see the result that they clearly chose to continue the fourth transformation of Mexico.
Yeah.
And that's something that what José Luis is mentioning about the role that the President AMLO let's say, performed during this election is something to analyze, because the way Claudia Sheinbaum represents him has been very criticized. Like, she has been openly criticized because some people have called something that I consider is very misogynistic, to call her like a copy of the president. Lots of critics towards the way she looks, lots of credit, the classical way to critic women, not about the way she performs political work or she does things, but the way she dresses up. But at the same time, she has been very open to say, yes, this is I cannot say that I'm not going to continue that, because I believe in what AMLO represents. But for example, I'm going.
Oh, by the way, sorry, I just realized AMLO is Andrés Manuel
Andrés
López
Manuel
Obrador. So for people who don't know, that's like his nickname, because that's what his name spells. And he's the president. He's stepping down as president. Yeah.
Exactly. One of the things that have been very criticized, and that would probably be one of these complaints, those official complaints that the opposition will do to the National Electoral Institute, will be that he made a lot of interventions in the elections that are not legal, that were like violations to the ruling. There were things that the president himself complained about when he was like competing for the position in 2006 and in 2012, and then in 2018. Let's remember, he was like, for me, this was the first election that I did without having him on the electoral ballot. Now, the fact that Claudia Sheinbaum comes with a lot of important things to highlight. I completely agree. I pretty much agree with all the things that Jose Luis said, but then at the same time, I think it's way more complex than only saying that this is completely kind of a good scenario. It is a good scenario in many ways. The minimum wage going up, it's very good. It's something that we waited for many years. But it also puts our democracy in a context that's going to be very complex, and we're going to have to analyze. First of all, this basically is like showing us a lot of things that many people were not able to see. The opposition and the way they're not able to understand how much Mexico wanted a party that represented them. Not only a party, I was just remembered this Pew Research Center study that was published, I remember, maybe in March this year, or maybe, I don't remember, in October or March of this year. And they did this research last year, and the results were terrific, because the majority of Mexican people that were interviewed like that were completely agreeing with the fact that that they would want that there would be no obstacles when the president would propose something in order to change not only the constitution, but also to make some different and important decisions decisions towards the way we work as a country. If you analyze that, as tough as it is, it's like, what are we considering democracy right now? That the president and the people in power can do whatever they want without having kind of a real conversation? Is that good for a democracy? I completely don't agree with. I disagree with that. But at the same time, it's completely reasonable that people is tired of that, because the opposition had 6 years to make a reflection, to say what happened here, what we did wrong, what's not working for people, why we have this crisis of representation, what are we going to do? And we didn't do it. And then Xochitl Galvez happens to be this very charismatic woman that was a senator, and that happens to appear last year as a let's say a star in the horizon, and the position was expecting her to do in 8 months what they didn't do in 6 years. And then now we have this just to give you a number, 33 million people voted for Claudia Sheinbaum. They decided that even though we are facing a crisis in security, we are not like it's a problem to have the militarization is itself. And you, Katie, and I, you have been both working in stories with people in Mexico that are against with the fact that Mexico is a militarized country right after the war on drugs that Felipe Calderon implemented. That we're facing the problem about violence towards women, that we're facing the problem that Pemex, the national fuel company, is no longer an institution that gives money to the country, even though that for them, even though all those scenarios, and I can mention you many of, like, let's say, like the the way Tren Maya has been facing a lot of complaints and a lot of research and investigation, the way it's damaging the ecosystems, the cenotes in the country. Even though of that, they decided the best way to go is to keep going with the self-called fourth transformation. And that is very representative of the country, of the complex country we are now.
I definitely agree with Miguel on that. I think the opposition seemed to never really be able to understand what happened in 2018. And even looking at the reaction now, they still seem to want to blame everybody but themselves about the result, or kind of go to these cheap answers saying, well, it's because they receive social programs. Now, the social programs obviously are a big deal here. We've seen a dramatic increase in the direct cash transfer programs. We're talking universal pension for seniors, supports for students, supports for people living in the countryside. It's called Sembrando Vida, so that they plant trees. Now, there's been this or that issue with some of these programs, but I think a lot of it isn't even so much about the state redistributing wealth directly into the pockets of the people, although that is important. I've talked to a lot of senior citizens who really highlight what it means. It means they can afford their medicines. It means they can go out with their grandkids to dinner and things like that, stuff that was really difficult when you're living on the edge of poverty or in extreme poverty. But actually, I think a lot of it is that we were talking about the crisis of democracy, the fact that, we had a change in power and it didn't really result in differences in people's lives in a material way. But with López Obrador and these social programs, which something about 7 or 8 out of 10 households receive at least one social program. So it's a massive breach. Is that it's a dignification, right? They feel seen. There's a lot of voices that are sympathetic to the opposition here in Mexico, and they've been talking about how they can't believe that the country would go down this path again, that, it took so long to get rid of the pre-dictatorship, and they're trying to make it seem like it's the return to authoritarianism. I highly disagree with that take. But I think they need to study to understand, why did the democratic system actually not have a lot of faith in the population? There was a Gallup poll that came out very recently, and in a single term, basically under the leadership of López Obrador, people's faith in their own institutions, in the democracy, has been restored because they feel seen, because they feel attended. They had been ignored, they were marginalized. And many of these voices, like I said, that are sympathetic to the opposition, continue to want to claim that, they're just easily bought, it's just the money. No, I think there's a lot to be said about actually feeling represented for the first time. And López Obrador, maybe Miguel will agree here, even if you like him or not, he's a political animal, right? He's very, very good at outsmarting his opponents. He's said to have visited every municipality in the country at least twice. So quite literally having that direct contact with the people. He has this morning press conference every day, Monday to Friday, 2 hours long. So that kind of direct connection. It'll be interesting to see what Claudia does in that place. Will she continue this kind of communication strategy? But I think that's a lot of it, of feeling represented, feeling reflected in the policies of the government. And, there was a letter that came out right before the election from cultural activists, writers who were critical of the Morena-led government. And one of them, Héctor Aguilar Camín, said, we miss the apapachos, or like the embracing, the caring that we used to receive from previous governments. And a lot of people that, that support Morena jumped on that, saying, what they want is they want to be the center of attention. They want to have direct access to power, to receive funding directly from the state. And instead, now that funding goes to the population. And then I think if the opposition was honest and said, this is the reason why we are not receiving support anymore, they maybe would have done better. There's only so far a charismatic figure can actually get to. And as we saw, you didn't get them very far in this election.
But I would like to go back to something that Jose Luis said, Katie. It's the word narrative, about it. It's like when you say something like that money, instead of going to intellectuals like Héctor Aguilar, it goes back to the people. That is something that we cannot deny, and I agree with Jose Luis. Is like, he's not only López Obrador is not only a political animal. He's the most charismatic president we've ever had, and he, in case you hate him, you love to hate him. It's the people who want to hate, and he can make you get angry. I personally I'm very critical of him, but I totally understand, and I'm aware about the way he works. He says the money is going back to the people, but he hasn't been able to make things transparent. He hasn't been able. He's been covering lots of information that we need to know, like the way the money used for the Tren Maya has been spent. We cannot know that because he decided that it's going to be filed for 5 years because he considers that's national security issue. That's something he hasn't been able to answer. All the concerns about the way his sons have been like part of lots of investigations and research related to corruption things, and he hasn't been able. He says, give me the proofs. There are the proofs there. There are lots of recordings that involve them, and he just says no. And you know what happens? His charisma and the power and the way people believe in him has been making these electoral systems so complicated. I think there are lots of scenarios. We could spend here 10 hours, but I would like to set some things that I would like you to have this a kind of opinion. It's the problem in the opposition, Katie, the opposition not blind completely to the situation in the country. The way it reacts. Yesterday was terrible to read the reactions in social media. People saying, so now on, I won't give a tip to the waiters and waitresses in the restaurants. Now on, I'm not going to give money to the people that work in the streets, to the Viene, that is the guy that helps you. We have a lot of info. We have a huge problem of non-formal jobs in the street, and the guy that helps you park your car, it's called the Viene, and we're not going to tip them, we're not going to give money to them, we're not going to help people that suffer from natural disasters, because if you voted for Morena, now Morena has to help you. And that is the level of analysis that a lot of people that belongs to the opposition has. Third, even though
the opposition, just for shorthand, is right-wing opposition.
Yeah, kinda, but at the same time, there's a lot of discussion about can you call a leftist movement that is supporting the militarization of the country? I don't know. I don't think we should call it like a left movement, to be honest. I could not call it one of the things that we criticized a lot to the president was the way he decided to cancel all the how you say estancias infantiles,
daycare facilities.
The daycare facilities from the beginning, because he said grandmothers are there to help the grandchildren. Do you consider that as a leftist?
Yeah, what was that, Jose Luis? What is your response to that? Because I'm a little protective, and I cut a lot of slack to leftists who are corrupt, because I'm like, well, I'd rather a leftist who's corrupt than a rightist who's corrupt. But that thing was weird to me, the daycare facility. But what is your response to what Mikey said in general, and then also the daycare facility question?
Yeah, well, I'll jump on the daycare thing first. The thing about the daycares is that it was a very inefficient regime that previously existed that basically handed over money to private entities that take care of running daycare facilities. And so it was a transfer from the public coffers to private hands. But ultimately, the solution, I agree, isn't giving to private citizens. In fact, we should expand the public daycare facilities under the Social Security system, try to get more workers out of the informal sector into the formal sector so that they're part of Social Security and can enjoy that benefit. In fact, there's a daycare facility around the corner from me, and they have a big banner basically asking more people, because they have plenty of spaces, but not enough people actually to fill them. And that, I think that, there was a bad way of communicating, is saying that, oh, let's have our grandmothers take care of things. And I think also it speaks to the fact that López Obrador is an older man. He comes from an older generation and has that way of thinking. He's also proposed things like banning vaping and things like that, as if that's the kind of punitive solution, right? There are certainly spaces where I disagree, but one of the benefits of Mexico is that he's constitutionally limited from seeking a second term. That's why he didn't run for re-election. And Claudia comes from a similar generation, but she is a little bit younger, has fresher ideas. One thing that I would highlight, people always talk about, oh, is she just going to replicate everything that he does? Is it just going to be, AMLO part 2? I think one place where we're definitely going to see a shift in policy is that she was actually a member of the climate change panel that won a Nobel Prize. So she's an expert on climate change. And so there is a large expectation that she's going to shift away from the emphasis that López Obrador had on fossil fuel extraction and more towards a green economy. The problem with that, again, right? Like people say that, oh, López Obrador, he's not interested in green energy. He probably isn't. I mean, we can look at the record for it, but Also, these whole so-called green energy initiatives that came in the previous regimes, same thing. These were sweetheart deals about moving money from the public sector into the private sector. The utility company was obligated to have to buy energy from these private green, quote unquote, energy firms first. And so that's not actually to benefit of the country. There was a really good article that came out recently. I'll forget the author of it, but basically making the argument I actually think is way more convincing. What is a better way to actually implement green policy? Dropping incentives to private companies that they will hopefully take up, or mandating a publicly owned state-run entity to actually do it. And I think it's right to expect, and if she doesn't do it, to demand that Claudia actually implement on this. You know, she's someone who knows the issue, and so she can't claim ignorance on this.
I mean, we're hopeful about that, but at the same time, yesterday we were a group of friends, journalist colleagues, were trying to analyze the first speech that Claudia Sheinbaum did, and it was pretty much exactly the same thing that Andres Manuel López Obrador did 6 years ago. And I'm not being this kind of people, the guy that says it is exactly. She's just copying it now. It was very, very, very alike. And now, 6 years after, things that Andres Manuel said, like, I'm not going to interfere in the justice system, after seeing how he tried to interfere in the justice system. He was trying to move his pieces to get power into it, to put people like Lenia Batres as in the Supreme Court. Lenia Batres, that happens to be the sister of the city mayor, and that happens to be the sister of another deputy, you know, and that has been self-called the minister of the people. I don't know if we can still believe in that, and I understand people criticizing Claudia. What also is something that will be very interesting in the following years, the following months, is the way we end up believing that we end up like supporting the way she works, or keep on criticizing, because the polarization process that has been part, and you may not deny this, Jose Luis. Every single day, the president takes not only 2 hours, he takes sometimes 4 hours to talk about the country. He has an amazing radio show, an amazing TV show. And he's been...
What's it called again? It's kind of like Chavez did this too, right?
Yeah, it's very simple. In fact, he's the second most popular Spanish YouTube program. Yes. That's how much people watch him. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And what we cannot blame him to say Mr. Obrador polarized the country. That's disgustingly false. He's not the one that said, there's the rich people and the narco people, because that's a terrible adjective. I guess I have explained you in the past, Katie, what means the connotations about calling narco to someone, but it's the poor people there. But he came here, and one of the first things that he did, he was like, these are the fifis, these are the good people, del pueblo bueno. And then the fifis are those guys and women with that have money, and the rich people. But the real rich people in the country, they have been having the same contracts that they used to have. Mr. Slim, Carlos Slim, the richest man in the world, he's friends with the president. He was the first one invited to the first trip in the Tren Maya. So that is kind of a different speech, that sometimes he says something and something else happens. If you criticize the president, then you are part of the evil media, the evil media that is like against him totally. And as you may know me, and I hope that Jose Luis is aware about it, like there's a lot of different new young journalists that we're not part of that, and that we're not doing exactly that, but we're considered exactly like that. But that not only happens to me, that it also happens to people. We have been experiencing the way, even though, again, the position is this is a dictatorship. We're not a dictatorship. We're not, but we're still the country where journalists are killed.
Yeah.
We're still a country with more than 100,000 disappeared people, and the way the president manages the narrative about that, it is not only something that you can admire if you admire the way people talk and the way people make speeches and rhetoric, but it's something that actually can be very scary for many of us, because if Claudia Sheinbaum continues with that policy of not answering frontally to things, like she didn't answer, if she's going to be investigating the president's sons, she said something like, for example, the link that she has to the Panama Papers, she said in the national debate, no, that's a complete lie, and she smiled to the camera. And then one day after, she says, "Oh yes, I mean, it's my grandma. She received some money, and she never told us, but she has something in the Panama Papers. She has something in the Virgin Islands." And then you say, "Okay, what am I going to do? Are we going to believe completely in what the president says if we have 6 years of lies, 6 years of polarization over the previous polarization?" There are a lot of questions about Claudia Sheinbaum that we'll need to answer, and we'll need to analyze, because it is not only about being Mexico's president. It's about how we're going to be dealing with the fact that Trump may be your next president, that there are elections in Europe, and that there's a more complicated situation in the world rather than believing her or not.
And Jose Luis, do you want to respond to that? If I have another question I have for you guys, but want to give you the chance to.
No, I think the polarization debate, I think, it's a difficult one to handle, because I think, there are real differences. There are very deep class differences in this society, right? I mean, we can talk a bit about the oligarchs, and it's true. Many of the billionaires in Mexico continued to accumulate wealth under López Obrador. If I were going to criticize him, I think what's one of the things that we should have gone further in terms of that. But even the way that some of his initiatives were treated by these same oligarchs, I think it's pretty instructive. For example, we have Ricardo Salinas Pliego. He is one of the wealthiest men in Mexico. He's a libertarian, or at least claims to be, and he advocates these kinds of, libertarian right-wing positions. But he owns a major bank called Banco Azteca. He owns
ADM where I work.
Yeah,
Actually.
and so one of the things that López Obrador did, he actually promised that he wasn't going to raise taxes, and he actually didn't. The only thing he did do was actually charge the taxes that were actually there. Before basically the tax entity would write them off and saying, or defer them years down the road. And what he said is, no, that practice ends, you're going to have to charge. And as a result, Salinas Pliego, every time that he gets into the headlines because of the tax issue, he'll dispatch his news anchors to attack the government on TV Azteca, right? And so there are very much class interests here that I think are being revealed. Certainly the polarization is something I think arguably did happen. There is kind of an us and them. But when we're talking about the bloc that supports López Obrador, Morena, and now Claudia Sheinbaum, I think it's also really important to pay attention to the election results, right? There's clearly public support for this project. It's overwhelmingly, right? And it's interesting that Miguel is talking about, is Claudia Sheinbaum going to be evasive in terms of some of her responses? I mean, at this point, they don't even have to negotiate with the opposition. What are they going to do with that? I think that's a more interesting question. Are they going to use that to do a fiscal reform, right? That's a hot potato. Are they actually going to do a increase taxes on that, or are they going to use it in order to kind of marginalize the minority parties at this point? My hope is that they leverage this massive election victory to continue the most positive aspects of the transformation, the things that are actually delivering real results for people.
Wanted to ask you guys about her position, well, both of theirs, AMLO's and Sheinbaum's position on Palestine.
I think one of the things that we will have to further analyze, not only in the next years, is like, is she going to continue with the exterior policy that the president had? Like the foreign policy. He has been very shady in many ways in some specific cases, like, for example, the Ukraine conflict. But then he's been very participative and full of opinions regard some other countries' things. In the case of the Palestinian situation, there hasn't been an official position about it, and I guess it's been because of a political need to not to make a lot of trouble about it. But at the same time, there is a clear message that is like, not official, but it's a clear message from the official parties, like they are pro-Palestine, even though it hasn't been openly done.
So I would disagree. I think there is an official position. The official position is calling for an immediate ceasefire and a peaceful resolution to the conflict. I would argue that that's not a good enough position. The movement on the streets in Mexico, I've accompanied many of the marches, has been really clear. Break relations with Israel, the way that other countries in Latin America have done. But I think when it comes to the issue of Palestinian liberation struggle, this has been probably the best government in recent years when it comes to that. So Mexico, under López Obrador, recognized the state of Palestine, which is something that hadn't happened before. It was one of the few countries in Latin America that hadn't done it. It took the case to the International Criminal Court around the issue of the ongoing genocide, and actually very recently signed on to, as a part of the parties interested in the discussion at the International Court of Justice that was presented by South Africa against Israel. So I think in many ways it's been very positive, and I don't think that any of the opposition parties would have taken a position like that. I think they should go further. They should break relations with Israel, and it would come at a very high price. There's a couple of people who have fled to Israel and are hiding and are wanted by the Mexican justice system, and I would suspect that's part of the reason why Israel has been actually clear about saying that the reason they haven't handed over some of these figures is because of López Obrador's position on Palestine. But in the case of Sheinbaum, there's been a lot of speculation because she's a Jewish woman. And that's been really disappointing, because the people saying, she's Jewish, she's a Zionist, she meets with the Zionist lobby and things like that. Certainly she did have meetings with people from Israel as part of her public duties. But can we say that this is a fair representation? Well, I'm not sure, but there's actually a publication that she came out. She wrote a piece many years ago at this point. I believe it was 12 years ago or 9 years ago. But she said specifically on the previous instance of Israel attacking Gaza, said that because I'm of my Jewish origin, because of my love for Mexico, because I feel like I'm a citizen of the world, because I share this desire of millions of people for justice, equality, fraternity, and peace, I can only see these horrific images of bombing by the Israeli state in Gaza, and nothing can justify the killing of Palestinian civilians, right? So the times that she has taken a public position has been quite good. And I think it's going to be important. There's been a lot of mobilizations here in Mexico to continue to put that pressure on, to continue to demand that they push to whatever place that Mexico has in the international community for an immediate ceasefire in order to end the horrors that are happening in Gaza.
And it's also interesting that, just one thing I want to say. It's interesting. Something that endears her to me is the attack she's been getting from people like the Democratic majority. Democrats for, what is it? Democratic
Majority for Israel, yeah.
Yes, Democratic Majority for Israel, which is kind of like an AIPAC group. But let's take a look. This was hilarious. So let's take a look at this tweet from Claudia. She writes, Gracias a Jesús, mi esposo, por acompañarme, which means literally, thank you, Jesus, my husband, for accompanying me. You don't have to know that much Spanish to understand that, or you can just do a translate. And let's see how someone from Democratic Majority for Israel responded to this.
Yeah, it was terrible.
If you can click on the first screenshot, Brad, please. Important to note that she is not involved in the Jewish community, and thank Jesus for her victory. So he didn't understand that she was thanking her husband for her victory, not Jesus Christ. And there's been a lot of criticism of her as being a bad Jew. Do we have the other tweet, Brad, that I found? This woman who's running for office in Arizona. I quote tweeted her, Brad. I don't know if we can show that later. It's not that important.
Yeah, but I remember saying, she doesn't really belong to our community and things like that.
She's not part of the community. She's an atheist. And
there were anti-Semitic attacks against her by none other than Vicente Fox, the former president, had to delete tweets after criticism because he made anti-Semitic attacks against Claudia, saying that the only Mexican candidate was Xochitl Gálvez. I mean, that's extraordinary.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a lot of dog whistles at the end of the campaign of saying that, she was misusing Catholic imagery because she had the Virgen of Guadalupe in one of her outfits and things like that, and she's not a Catholic, and so why is she using it? And then quite literally the very last thing that Xochitl Gálvez put up on social media before the campaign period officially closed, the veda electoral, she's like, I'm praying praying because God is on my side. It was definitely kind of like a wink, wink, vote for the Catholic woman. But it's been interesting also the reaction to that, because I always say if this was a right-wing woman running in some European country and she was elected to a heavily Catholic country despite coming from a religious ethnic minority, that would be celebrated. But because she comes from a progressive leftist party, it's used something to attack her. And it's really unfortunate. I think it's extraordinary. I mean, where other place in the world can you see somebody who comes from a very tiny minority being elected to the highest office? And not only that, but also being the first woman at the same time. I think that, I'm not one for, just symbolic victories, but I do think that that's something that's worth highlighting.
But that's very representative of the things that she will be dealing in a country like the one we live in. Like a lot of attention to things that wouldn't be that important in case she would be a man. That is terrible, but that is true. And a lot of like I may say attacks that wouldn't be done to a man, and they are done to her just because of that. Like and also a lot of conversation that we should be having about the way we understand democracy and the way we discuss politics. Because
before we do that, I got to show the tweet that I mentioned before, just because I think it's so rich. So this is from someone who's running for office in Arizona. Her name is Alma Hernandez. And she's, I guess, a member of Congress. And so she wrote, to all Jewish Twitter, please stop with the excitement to elect the first woman Jewish president of Mexico. Sheinbaum is of Jewish descent, but doesn't participate in the Jewish community or have its backing. She says she is an atheist, never denounced October 7th, and refused to condemn Hamas and speak out about the Mexican nationals held hostage. She is no friend of Israel. So y'all can calm down. She is unaffiliated with the community and does not want to be associated. Please do your research. Okay, this is a woman, by the way, who hasn't been Jewish. She hasn't even had a decade of being Jewish under her belt. She converted. She apparently has a maternal grandfather who's Jewish, which is fine. I'm not going to judge people who convert, but she is newer to the faith. Like, for me, I don't care if you're religious. To me, you're Jewish if you have Jewish ancestry. That's my definition. Clearly, this woman doesn't think that that's sufficient, right? And but it is true that she wasn't Jewish if you're going to be religious, and I don't accept this definition. But by that woman's definition, wasn't Jewish, despite her maternal grandfather, because you have to have your mother to be Jewish. So if her mother wasn't Jewish, her mother wasn't Jewish because her mom wasn't Jewish. Anyway. This doesn't matter, obviously. I'm just pointing out the hypocrisy, and it's kind of rich to see someone who's been Jewish for 5 minutes come out and define what it means to be a real Jew.
And also, Claudia's grandparents fled Nazi persecution, right? The reason she finds herself in Mexico was because her ancestors had to flee persecution. And, the truth is, she said it previously, right? She's not an active participant of the religious part of Judaism, but she's very much kind of kept with the traditions and many of the sort of normal activities of the Jewish community growing up. She grew up in a sense a red diaper baby, right, from parents who were Jewish communists, right, and who educated her in these values. And I think a lot of it is also reflected in some of her own views. I think it's really unfortunate, right? We saw a lot of press saying, "Oh, she's AMLO's handpicked successor," which was not even true, right? Like the party had a process. In fact, the process almost split the party because one of the second place candidate was unhappy and he almost left, but he didn't. But there was a decision made. There was a process for it. But it's this attempt to kind of make it seem like she's not worthy of her own merit, but she clearly is. I mean, she comes from the grassroots. She was a student activist. She was very much involved with that. She was, she cut her teeth in politics working with López Obrador when he was mayor of Mexico City. So, she has a lot of credentials on her own. And I think, these kinds of attacks, it's all an attempt to try to weaken her and try to undermine her legitimacy as now that she's becoming president.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about this, Luis and Katie. You may have a take about it, but it's like in the middle of the process of the electoral the campaigns. I was wondering what would have happened if they would be competing by themselves, to having Claudia being able to speak about all the things that she wanted, that she could do without having to protect things related to Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and at the same time Xochitl Galvez working or being able to talk and to feel free to do the things without having to deal with the PRI and the PAN and the PRD behind her, because that is the main reason, according to my personal opinion, that didn't allow her to have more people voting for her, because we no longer believe as a country in those two parties, and even though you may be very complaining towards Morena, even though there's a lot of people saying I'm not going to vote again for those 70 years of oppression that we have lived and gone through. And you know what? Something that makes me happy is to think we have a woman there. There's a lot of hope about her. I'm very critical, and I'm going to be way more, because that's what I believe. That's the journalism that I've learned from people like you, Katie. You have never to be in good terms with power. But we're hoping that she's going to move forward by herself, to get away from those things that we criticize about Andres Manuel. I don't believe in that. Yeah, she may be part of the Nobel Prize, but she hasn't been supported about clean energies, and she has been supportive about the refinery, those Bocas, the building of a refinery that still has not given us 1 barrel of oil. There's a lot of things, and then I guess the real issue is about narrative. Is she going to be working with it? I hope not. I hope she will be able to govern as a woman in the terms that we in the million terms that we can understand that in a different way. But what I see is a lot of women happy, and for the first time in my life I've seen that happening. People feeling represented, but mainly the 52% of the country, for finally being able to think, my daughter or the kids now thinking I can be a president one day. In a macho culture like ours, that is something to remark completely.
Well, and it's nice that she's not like a reactionary, like Margaret Thatcher, right? Because that I'm not very sentimental about that, if that's the type of person.
We'll see. We still don't know that much.
Well, I doubt it. I would be very surprised. But last question. What should be done about this? Is a huge question, but you talked about, Miguel, about the securitization of the country, the militarization, the war on drugs. What is the solution to all of this? Both like from within Mexico, like if you guys had a magic wand, what would the policy be from the United States and from Mexico to this problem?
Taking back to the cartels, make the military, make them do what they have to do, and stop giving them so much money, and stop making them do things that they shouldn't be doing, and to be transparent about the amount of money, because Mr. Obrador hasn't been transparent enough, and nobody can deny that. They haven't been, and I don't think, unfortunately, I cannot hope that Claudia Sheinbaum will be. That's, for me, the solution. I've been fighting for 12 years to put back the military in their quarters. I voted for Andres Manuel López Obrador.
What does that mean? Sorry, to put the military back in their...
in the barracks.
The barracks.
Okay.
So send them back to their... Okay, got it.
I voted for that because I was part of these people that didn't want the war on drugs. I worked on the field. I've been working on the field, and nowadays for me it's quite hard to find out that people that was marching with me, that was working with me in those topics, that was in the streets calling out for that, now are saying that we're fine. I cannot believe that. That's why I'm so critical about AMLO, and also I'm so critical about Sheinbaum.
Okay. I mean, the way you framed your question was, if I could implement any solution, I would focus on the demand side as opposed to the supply side. I think there's way too much emphasis on trying to mitigate the movement of drugs from Mexico into the United States without actually considering that the problem is actually, as long as there's a demand for illicit substances, there's going to be someone who's going to try to figure out a way to get it there. And that's really the source of the problem. It should be treated as a public health issue as it is. The reason I always talk about that is, like, for example, fentanyl, which is one of the major crises here. I did a couple of speaking tours in the United States, and it's extraordinary. I lived in the United States for many years, but I hadn't been back in a while. The way that you see people who are clearly dealing with addictions, living on the streets, it's very difficult to see. I can understand why people are desperate for a solution, but the solution isn't to to demand that Mexico go after the kingpins and continue this failed strategy of going after the drug cartels the way that Felipe Calderón did. I definitely agree with Miguel on that. The problem is that it needs to be treated as a public health concern. When we talk about fentanyl specifically, right, the reason it comes from the precursors and fentanyl is coming from Mexico is because it used to come from China, but then China cracked down on its exports directly to the United States. And so they figured out a different way to get it in, and they go through Mexico to get it into the United States. That's really the problem. When it comes to the militarization, similarly, I would like to see, not the armed forces not on the streets. I think there is a public demand for it. If you go to communities that are heavily impacted, the first things they'll say is that, well, we trust the army more than we trust the police. We should be careful when we talk about militarization because, a civilian police force is just as capable of human rights violations as the armed forces. And we've seen it happen, right? It was the federal police that committed a lot of the human rights violations. That doesn't write off the human rights violations that the armed forces did. But we need to get it to find a situation where they're no longer necessary to be on the streets. They often criticize what was basically a campaign slogan, right? The abrazos no balazos, hugs, not bullets. That's not actually the policy. It's not like that's not what actually is happening in Mexico.
I don't agree with that. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, there's always people who are trying to frame it this way. I mean, it hasn't worked to the degree that I think we expected it to, but the emphasis was always on attacking to the root causes, making it so that the people who are being drawn into organized crime groups actually have an option and that they aren't seduced into working with this, and giving them employment opportunities, making sure that they have safe communities and things like that. For example, here in Mexico City, I live in a working class neighborhood that actually used to be really dangerous. And the thing that turned it around was the creation of these youth-led community center called Pilares. That Pilares here in this neighborhood, Magdalena de las Salinas, is actually what made the community safer, because it means that people were moving around, their eyes on the street. That means the kids had something to do. Obviously, that's just a microcosm of the issue, right? But it speaks to the fact that that's really where the solution is, not the crackdown. And in fact, we've seen actually López Obrador trend a little bit towards back to that kingpin strategy, trying to keep the United States happy. They extradited El Chapo's son to satisfy the demands from the U.S. Justice Department, things like that. That strategy clearly doesn't work. And you're right, López Obrador did campaign on sending them back to the barracks. That hasn't happened yet. And that's something we should see. But I think before we talk about that, we actually do have to address the security situation. We can't ask cops with 9mm to face off with these cartels that are heavily armed, which is another factor, right? We need to stop the flow of the flow of guns from the U.S. into Mexico. Where are they coming from? How are they heavily armed the way that they are, that they can take on armed forces? Well, the guns are coming from somewhere. They're coming from the U.S. In fact, Mexico has actually sued the gun manufacturers, saying, you are responsible for this. You are not implementing policies strictly enough to actually keep these these guns coming into Mexico.
Another really deep question, because that was so fascinating hearing your guys' responses to that. So another broad question. What do you say? What should be done about I don't even want to frame it this way, the immigration issue? What should be done about that? And also, how do you reach people? Because I've had increasingly encounters with people who aren't, I'm not even going to judge them or qualify them. I'll just say a lot more people than I would have thought are accepting the narrative of illegals, aliens, and if this is audio only, I'm putting those in quotation marks, being responsible for the economic suffering in the United States. And people of both parties and people who aren't particularly, I wouldn't have thought of them, I should say, as xenophobic, really accepting this narrative that we're being invaded at the borders. So what is your guys' response to that?
I want to put something that happened in context. First of all, when I personally voted for Andrés Manuel López Obrador, because I was feeling that his humanistic side was going to be a real frontal part in the way we would be talking and dealing with the immigration situation that we have been dealing with. At some point, it didn't happen in 2020. In 2023, in Ciudad Juárez, there was an incident. 27 people died out of a fire, and that's something that he hasn't been able to solve. There's nobody that is in a process of justice, as many other cases, like for example, all these corruption things that he has been talking about for 6 years. He never proved anything, nothing about the maternal facilities, nothing about the other a lot of other things that he called corrupt. So I would hope for a humanistic vision about it. And also for a successful dialogue with the United States. Unfortunately, Trumpzilla is pretty much walking towards us. Trumpzilla, and I really hope Sheinbaum will be able to deal with that, and she will have to have a lot of support from the country. We are dealing with an immigration crisis, and that's not something that I say. It's something that I have been researching for the last months. A lot of interviews with people that work with them. We have been actually being witnesses of how many immigrants from Haiti, from Central America, have been becoming part of the city scenario, and in many other places in the States. I'm just talking about the Mexico City because I live here, and the way they have been used for political reasons, like not very close to where the place I live. There is the Haitian community living in the street, and then at that time, the alcaldesa, the mayor of the place I live, Sandra Cuevas, was saying that it was part of the mayor of the city of Martí Batres, and neither of them were able to solve it all. And we're talking about like human rights.
Yeah.
I have to say, López Obrador didn't do anything. His policy was not successful, and I hope for the best, but I highly doubt it, unfortunately.
I would say similarly to the last question, I think the problem begins and ends with U.S. policy. And I think what we've seen is the U.S. is not meeting its international obligations to migrants and refugees and asylum seekers. I think they've obviously put extraordinary pressure on Mexico to implement some very strict immigration controls to stem the flow of migrants, and Mexico has conceded to that. And it's one of the areas that I've worked. I've traveled many times to Mexico's southern border with Guatemala. Talked with a lot of migrants. It's an issue that's personally important to me. I can hear the same kind of conviction from Miguel's voice as well. It's one of the places where it's been really disappointing to see the way that they've been scapegoated, the way that they've been abused. I mean, every migrant you talk to will tell you the hardest part of the journey isn't the Darien Gap where many people die. It's through Mexico. It's where they have to deal with extortion. It's where they have to deal with violence. They have to deal with kidnapping, with organized crime groups. It's really, really quite terrible. But the point that I wanted to make is that this wouldn't be an issue if the U.S. had a responsible migration policy, if they actually had legal pathways for people, and if they stopped engaging in imperialist policies that create migration issues in the first place. If you look at the actual trends of flows, for a while there, many of them, where do they come from? Honduras. Why? Because there was a U.S.-backed dictatorship in Honduras.
Thank you, Hillary.
Where are many of the migrants coming from now? Venezuela and Cuba. Why? Because Cuba is blockaded and Venezuela is dealing with economic sanctions, right? And so actually one of the interesting things that I find really disappointing about some of the discourse in the United States is that López Obrador should be criticized. I think the migrants, while they're in Mexico, should be able to receive protection and better treatment, and they're not. They end up having to make these impromptu camps, which are horrible conditions. And I think that's something that could be easily changed with some investment. If you could actually just, respect the human rights of migrants and try to treat them better while they're here. Whether or not they move on in their journey, I think is a separate issue. But while they're here, they should be treated better. But López Obrador has talked about the fact that if you want to stem the migration, the flow of migrants, stop engaging in these policies. He explicitly called for lifting sanctions against Venezuela, lifting sanctions against Cuba, ending the blockade. And that's never part of the discourse, right? Yeah. That's never part of the discussion. And you talk to any Venezuelan migrant and they will tell you that they would be happy to go back home if conditions improve there. And they don't, because the US has once again imposed a punishing, brutal economic sanctions campaign against that country. That needs to be part of the discussion as well. And it never is, right? The border is going to be shut down tonight, apparently. You know what that's going to result in? It's just going to overwhelm an already beleaguered Mexican system that is led by somebody who probably should be in jail because of his responsibility with this fire that killed so many people in Ciudad Juarez, into the jaws, more like it, of organized crime groups that are profiting from human smuggling. I mean, you know who's happiest with this news that the border is going to be shut down? It's the human smugglers. It's the people who are going to now make more money getting people across the border because there isn't that many legal pathways. I mean, they have this stupid app that doesn't have enough spaces, that barely works. You actually, they have a limitation in terms of where you can even apply. For one of the reasons why there was a point in last year that Mexico City was full of migrants was because Mexico City is one of the first places where you can finally start to use that app and apply and ask for one of the spots to be able to go in, right? Like, this is not serious policy. They have international obligations that they're not respecting. And obviously there's going to be apparently a phone call between the leaders of Mexico and the United States soon around this, because the truth is the US can't carry out this policy without Mexico's help. Now, but I would disagree with some voices out there who say, well, the solution would come if Mexico just refused. I think that's unfair. You can't ask a geopolitically weaker state to stand up to the United States. I mean, Trump said explicitly, I mean, that's how he was able to get Mexico to cooperate. Like, if you don't do this, I'm going to erase tariffs on your goods. And the longer you continue to refuse, I'm going to keep raising them. And it was obviously going to destroy the economy. And as always, as it is so true in so many countries, right? You know, who are the first people who are thrown under the bus? Migrants, right? I think López Obrador made a political calculation. Look, Trump says that if I cooperate with him on this migration issue, he'll keep his hands off of my domestic policy. And effectively, that is what happened, right? And so, you know, they can't be treated as bargaining chips. They are human beings. They have human rights. Those human rights should be respected. I think one of the demands we should make of Claudia's government is precisely that. Migrants, when they're in Mexico, should be protected. They should be afforded comforts, security, migration authorizations, work permits, whatever it is. The actual border issue, that's far more complex. That involves negotiating with another country. But I think one of the key things that we should expect of a humanistic government is better treatment and respect for human rights of migrants.
That we haven't had.
But we haven't had it.
Well, thank you. This has really been fascinating. And it's been, I have to say, we've been focusing so much since October 7th on Palestine. And it's been really nice to talk about things. Although we managed to talk about Palestine on this segment too, but it is nice to talk about other things.
It's the issue of our times, and I think I'm glad. One of the reasons I'm a fan of the show is because you're keeping that attention on it. Yeah, but I do think that this is a good news story. I certainly view it. You know, I felt really good. I saw Miguel also has his thumb. We use indelible ink here to prevent fraud in the elections. So I went to vote, and I was very proud of being able to participate in the system. You know, I'm a family man. I have you know, a partner and children, and I'm excited because, you know, also here in Mexico City, Clara Brugada, who has an excellent track record coming from the grassroots of left-wing activism. She's now going to be the mayor of Mexico City. And so I'm looking forward to what it's going to be like to raise my kids in a city like Mexico City, governed by someone like that, and in a country governed by Claudia Sheinbaum.
Clara Brugada, that her name stands for clear, and someone that unfortunately hasn't been clear about a lot of, you know,
what a big thing. Undermining our unity, our message of unity at the end.
No, the thing is, like, at some point, Jose Luis and I were on the same page, you know, but.
Do you guys know each other in real life, by the way?
No, but I guess he's more hopeful, and I love the fact that he's more hopeful. I actually
that's what we can end on. Yeah.
And I am the evil guy here, but you know that I love to be the villain, and I'm happy about that. And thank you very much for making this space possible, Katie. You are an amazing communicator, and an amazing journalist, and these are the kind of the spaces that are changing the media globally, and we need more spaces like this.
Well, thank you both so much for coming on. It's been really amazing talking to you guys.
Thank you.
And come back on again.
Great exchange.
Yeah, come to Mexico again, and then we do it.
I will, yeah. Okay. We'll do a live taping.
Yes.
Great. Good night, guys.
Bye.
That was great. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Give this a thumbs up if you haven't already. Give it a thumbs up. Give it a thumbs up. Maybe, well, Brad, I have to ask you a question. Should part of this be Patreon, do you think? The pressure's on. Let's see what he says. No? All right, now I can't make any of it Patreon. But we got to give the people something. We're going to have to do an Ask Me Anything this week or something for Patreons. Or Brad, wait, Brad, can you come on for a second? I'm going to bully Brad. All right, Brad.
Hey, Katie.
Hey, Brad, how's it going?
Meh.
All right. Well, Brad, you're going to love this. Let's give the people some of your very good art stuff.
Oh, okay.
Week. So patrons, you're going to get some great art stuff.
Cool. I mean, yeah, and I'll just put it out there. Some of it's funny. Some of it's kind of dark.
Yeah.
It varies. But it's just whatever comes to my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Tyler's going to start coming on and doing a millennial rant. We got to start that. Brad was
boy.
supposed to do his rants. Then Tyler was going to do his millennial rants. Wait, is Tyler too young to be a millennial?
Probably. I don't know. I'm going to say probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I know that you and I are like
senior millennials.
The first year that could be considered millennial is you and me.
Okay, Tyler, do you want to come on and correct the record?
Oh, geez.
I think officially I'm not a millennial, unfortunately. I don't ascribe to any group.
No, it's good because we want to cover bases on the show. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I think I'm like technically what's after millennials?
Gen Z.
Gen Z. I think I'm technically, I was born in 97, but
okay.
I would say that I'm just me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're just you.
Labels
are for jars, as they say. Yeah.
Labels are for jars?
Yeah. Have you ever heard that? It's so corny, but it's really funny. Yeah. I used to have in my bio, it's like Katie Halper went to Wesleyan where she learned that labels are for jars.
Oh.
Yeah. But let's see. Oh, yes, someone was supposed to come on this week. It's true.
Yep.
Someone whose name rhymes with Schmorman Schminkelstein, and he didn't, but he is coming on next week.
Yeah.
There was a scheduling issue, and this is good because he'll have more research.
Yeah, and I'm really thankful for Miguel and Jose coming on, because I've really, obviously covering what's been happening in Palestine is extremely important, but also I'm really glad that we were able to spend some time with some of these other very important things that are going on.
Yeah. And let me just read the super chats that we didn't get to. Jews like Katie and Natura Karda are the antidote to any anti-Semitism rising because of the Zionist entity. Sabrina Lee, caught alive, sweet. Wadeworth, thank you so much, Wadeworth, for your generous super chat. Okay, we asked this one. Thanks, firmware. The Dems are the lizard people my plug tells me about. I don't know what plug means.
Maybe I don't know.
You're a drug dealer.
Is that it? Okay, you see, that's why we need Tyler.
That's the Gen Z. Gen Z.
Yeah. Gen X is old, right?
is older than you and
us.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katie, and all the people on your show. Thank you. And thank you, Phantom Esfanta, for the clips.
I thought that maybe it was a misspelling and it was supposed to be your pug tells you about.
Oh, that would be really cute.
And you're definitely doing a lot of drugs.
Then
you know what I'm gonna make? You know what I'm gonna make for the Patreon this week, Brad? Let's give them a slideshow that I made of Deborah Messing and the Nakba.
That was crazy.
Yeah, you're gonna get a Deborah Messing Nakba slideshow.
Yeah.
Deborah messing about.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Deborah messing about the Nakba. Yeah. Which is something I did a couple years ago when I was really mad at her, but I never released it. So now you guys will get it. It'll be first. You guys will see it first.
Yeah.
Hannah wants us to know that she's stoned. Wanker
right.
Tanker writes pug dog. Yes. What else? Yes, good info on Mexico. That's all good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Verena Fraser says Hannah, because I guess Verena's excited that Hannah's stoned. You don't have to apologize, Hannah. Unless is it illegal for me to say this? No, right? I'm not going to get in trouble.
No.
Oh, I hope the cops don't show up on Hannah's door. Hannah, don't put your address in your YouTube bio.
People are very suggestible when they're stoned. Yeah, you better.
Better
just not say anything.
Yeah, better not say anything. Yeah. All right, well, guys, this has been really fun. And Tyler, when are you gonna have your Gen Z rant ready?
As soon as I become a millennial, so a couple more years.
Okay.
No, I'm joking. Okay. I'll have one ready. I got to just find a topic.
You are Gen Z, right? Gen Z.
That's what they tell me. Yeah.
All right, cool.
What they told me in court.
Yeah. We should start doing polls. Be like, what do you want Brad to rant about? What do you want Tyler to rant about?
Oh, that's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure you guys will love that, right? Being told what to rant about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I got plenty of opinions to go around. So
great. Yeah. Well, this was really fun, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you so much.
Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, I'm down.